Worms slithered through his body as he still breathed, devouring him from the inside out. His skin peeled and rotted, chunks of flesh falling away until he became a walking corpse. The stench of his decay was so overwhelming that even his soldiers turned from him in disgust, unable to stand near their once mighty ruler. This is no myth. It is the stomach-churning fate of a king who called himself a god, Antiochus Epiphanes, whose final days remain among the most horrifying deaths ever recorded. But before the worms, before the unbearable stink and the seething corruption of his own body, Antiochus was one of the most powerful men in the world. So how did a king who styled himself God Manifest end up as a feast for maggots while he was still breathing? To get how he fell so far, you have to understand his staggering arrogance. Antiochus IV wasn't even the rightful heir to the throne of the vast Seleucid Empire. He was a younger son who'd spent years as a political hostage in Rome. But after his brother was murdered, he used a mix of political scheming and sheer nerve to seize power in 175 BC. He was known for being a bit of a loose cannon. The historian Polybius tells stories of him sneaking out of the palace to drink with commoners, often making a fool of himself. This erratic behavior earned him a nickname among his enemies, Epiphanes, meaning the Mad One, a nasty play on his chosen title, Epiphanes, which meant God Manifest. Antiochus saw himself as a champion of Greek culture, a bringer of Hellenistic enlightenment. He founded cities, built huge temples to Greek gods, and promoted a sophisticated lifestyle. But under that shiny surface was a will of iron. His vision of a unified Greek-speaking empire had no room for anyone who wouldn't get with the program, and no one resisted more fiercely than the Jews of Judea. For centuries, the Jews had practiced their unique, monotheistic religion with a degree of freedom. Antiochus saw this as a roadblock. He didn't just want to Hellenize them. He launched a campaign to erase their entire culture. Jewish traditions were outlawed, and the punishment was death. Owning sacred scriptures became a capital crime. Scrolls were burned, and those found with them were executed. Ancient sources like the Book of Maccabees even claim that mothers who had their sons circumcised were crucified with their infants hung around their necks. The breaking point came in Jerusalem. After a humiliating political setback in Egypt, a furious Antiochus unleashed his rage on the city. He sacked it, plundered its treasures, and in 167 BC committed his ultimate act of blasphemy, the desecration of the Second Temple, the holiest site in Judaism. Antiochus stormed the temple, set up an idol of the Greek god Zeus on the holy altar, and in a final, calculated insult, sacrificed a pig, an animal considered deeply unclean in Jewish law, right on top of it. To the Jewish people, this was the abomination of desolation, a profound spiritual horror. This sacrilege sparked a furious uprising, the Maccabean Revolt. Antiochus, utterly confident, took off to fight other battles, leaving his generals to crush the Jewish rebels. He had no idea that in desecrating their god, he had, according to his enemies, sealed his own fate. The beginning of the end for Antiochus didn't happen on a battlefield. According to the ancient book of 2 Maccabees, it started with a pain deep inside him. While on campaign in Persia, he got the news. His armies in Judea had been crushed by the rebels under Judas Maccabeus. The shock and rage of this defeat, the text says, triggered an incurable and invisible blow. It began with a relentless, agonizing pain in his bowels that gave him no rest. Some accounts suggest he also had a bad fall from his chariot, which only made his internal torment worse. But this was no ordinary illness. According to the story, something far more sinister had begun. The second book of Maccabees paints a truly grotesque picture. The ungodly man's body swarmed with worms, and while he was still living in anguish, and pain, his flesh rotted away. His living tissue began to putrefy. Maggots reportedly bred within his flesh, consuming him from the inside out, with pieces of his body sloughing off. And then there was the smell. The stench of his living decay was allegedly so foul that it became unbearable. His own soldiers were repulsed. The Chronicle says that because of the stench, the whole army felt revulsion at his decay. The man who called himself God Manifest was now an object of utter horror, a walking corpse being betrayed by his own body. Now, could something like this actually happen? From a modern medical perspective, it's highly likely the ancient account was exaggerated to make a moral point. However, some scholars have tried to find a medical explanation. One theory points to a severe parasitic infestation like phthiriasis, lice. In a person with a compromised immune system, constant scratching creates open sores. These sores can get infected with bacteria, leading to tissue death, necrosis, and sepsis. The worms described were likely lice or maggots from flies drawn to the rotting wounds. So, while the idea of being eaten alive sounds like a legend, it could be a dramatic description of a parasitic infestation combined with a catastrophic secondary infection. His doctors were powerless. As his body fell apart, his mind supposedly did too. The historian Polybius wrote that Antiochus was struck by a perpetual delirium, tormented by visions of terrifying spirits. The proud king was trapped in a prison of his own rotting flesh, abandoned by his men and haunted by his mind. In his final days, Antiochus was a broken man. He was transported through the Persian mountains, every jolt of the journey increasing his agony. He finally came to a stop in the town of Tabai. There, lying in a foreign land, the king supposedly confronted the source of his suffering. According to the account in 1st Maccabees, his arrogance finally shattered. In a moment of clarity, he's said to have confessed his sins, reportedly saying, "But now I remember the wrong I did in Jerusalem. I seized all its vessels of silver and gold, and I sent to destroy the inhabitants of Judah without good reason. I know that it is because of this that these misfortunes have come upon me. Here I am, perishing of bitter disappointment in a strange land." It was a deathbed confession, an admission, at least in this telling of the story, that his torment was a direct result of his blasphemy. He acknowledged the God of the Jews, the very God whose temple he had defiled. In his delirium, he supposedly promised to adorn the holy city, repay the stolen treasures, and even to honor the Jewish faith. But it was too late. In 164 BC, after days of unimaginable suffering, King Antiochus IV Epiphanes finally died. The man who claimed divinity was vanquished not by a rival army, but by a disease so foul it became a legend. The story of Antiochus Epiphanes is one of history's most brutal ironies. A king who named himself God Manifest was rendered so foul that other people couldn't stand to be near him. A ruler who wanted to impose his own vision of order on the world died in a state of utter corruption and chaos. He saw himself as a civilizing force, but his legacy is forever stained by his arrogance and his horrific, worm-eaten end. His death was seen by his enemies not just as a victory, but as divine justice delivered in the most visceral way imaginable. It became a powerful cautionary tale, a testament to the belief that no ruler, no matter how powerful, stands above judgment. The history they don't teach you in school is often the most human, and in this case, the most inhuman. It leaves us with a chilling question. What's the true measure of a legacy? Is it the monuments you build or the way your enemies tell the story of your end? If you found this dive into one of history's most gruesome ends fascinating, you won't want to miss our video on the bizarre case of King Herod the Great. According to the historian Josephus, he met a similarly stomach-churning and divinely inflicted fate. Click here to watch that next, And don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the darkest corners of the past.